I am so pleased today to enter into a conversation with a dear friend and colleague, known her for many years, the Reverend Dr. Cathy Campbell, who currently, like myself, enjoys the life of retirement. She from her base in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and myself from Kamloops, BC, where I recently retired from ordained ministry at St. Paul's Cathedral in downtown Kamloops, a city which is very much in the news these days. Of course, Cathy was in the news during her time at St. Matthew's in Winnipeg, as she, with others, transformed that liturgical space into a multifaceted, multi-use community center called the West End Commons. Cathy's a woman of considerable brilliance and original creativity. She has a long association with the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, with whom we are engaging this season of creation. And she also is active within the Canadian Foodgrains Bank and provides a liaison between those two groups. And lo and behold, I have my own personal copy of your book, Stations of the Banquet. What's the subtitle here? Things I Have Known and Loved. Faith Foundations for Food Justice. I know this book has a particular history. Can you give us, and for folks who may not have seen your book or read your book, and I do apologize, the first time we met, I said to you, I've been reading your book. I read it just before I go to bed at night. That could have been taken in a very negative way, but I got away with it at the time. Why was the connection between food and faith so important for you then, and probably still is now?
It surely is. I had spent almost 20 years working on food justice issues, largely in an academic environment, although I did do community nutrition in Edmonton at one point. My focus was largely on hunger and food insecurity and programs to address that, both in a public health context and then in an academic research context. And when I went to seminary, and I'll come back to the why of that, when I went to seminary to study to be an Anglican priest, there was never a mention of food. We enjoyed food. We had a wonderful time eating and laughing and being together around food. We celebrated the Eucharist every day, but we never talked about food or food justice and the connection between faith and food justice. So after 7 or 8 years of ministry, I had the opportunity to take a break and thought, let me explore the interface between faith issues, our tradition, and food justice. And as I started down that path, I rediscovered our tradition in a whole new, and I think for me, exciting way. I would say I became a deeper and more committed Christian for that journey. So, but that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, 20 years ago. So it was a wonderful bringing together consciously in my mind of two big threads that I think are hugely important in our world.
You alluded very briefly to the fact that when you wrote the book, that was then, but this is now. What does the food faith continuum or connection look like for you now? Have things changed in some disturbing or interrupting way?
Well, the disturbing way is that there's more hungry people in the world than there was in 2001, 2002. And that's deeply distressing, because as Jesus says in the feeding of the 4,000, I do not want to send them away hungry. And over and over again in our gospel, Jesus does not want to send people away hungry. He has compassion. He has a sense of the kingdom present, moving in our midst, and what's possible when you see the world that way. And I believe if we could really understand, if we could really immerse ourselves or commit ourselves to a Jesus way, there would be no hungry people in the world.
Yes, I've heard the same argument from other
Mhm.
people too. There is enough food. Is it simply a problem of distribution or a lack of just or equitable distribution?
Yes, but then I would ask a deeper question, right? What's behind that? So, behind hunger, there's certainly war, civil conflict.
Mm.
There's certainly soil degradation and abuse of the environment and climate change. And yes, there's certainly economic disparity and marginalization of vulnerable people. So that's at the surface, right? But if you say why to that, the why, I think, to come fully to an answer, you have to say it's a spirit problem. It's a problem of human spirit and understanding of how we're all connected to each other and all connected to God's creation around us. If we don't solve or address or nurture the food that we need for the spirit dimension of this problem, we will not address truly the hunger problem, which is Jesus' command in the feeding of the 4,000. So part of my journeying to seminary had to do with how do we work on, how do we nurture and cultivate a spirit life that would ensure that there are no hungry people in the world. And that question, I found out as I was writing the book and have since explored further, is multidimensional.
Who are the spirit messengers? Organizations, people? Let's be Anglican and say everybody. I don't know. What do you think?
I think we say everybody, absolutely. And everybody from parents teaching children to teachers teaching children to teachers creating curriculums to churches and Sunday school programs and preachers and then economic realities. Who grows the food? Who what's the economic system behind agriculture and food distribution? And of course, importantly, always our governments, where we come together to create a sense of common vision and the rules that we're going to follow together. So let me just give you one quick example, right? So we're not just talking in an abstract way. Obviously, in order to address hunger, we have to have people who care about hunger, who care about other people, who care about children going to bed with nothing. But when the Canadian Foodgrains policy people went to talk to our government, our MPs, our civil servants, and said, why is Canada not living up to its obligation to provide assistance for international development? They said, because people don't care. because the citizenry doesn't have that high enough in its commitments for the government to respond. So they spend their money in other ways. But so the Canadian Foodgrains Bank said, let's run a campaign to convince the politicians and the civil servants that indeed Canadian people care. Canadian people care about these issues. So they created a campaign called the I Care campaign, which was a simple letter that you could send to your MP or send to the Prime Minister to say, when it comes to ending global poverty and hunger, I care. So the Canadian Foodgrains Bank is a collective of 15 of the major Christian international development groups in Canada. They came together to support this campaign. PWRDF had hired a person to work across the country within parishes to encourage involvement in this campaign. And it was a success. The government has not met its commitment to international development, but it hasn't decreased it. And that's critical these days. So how does it work? How do we teach people to care? We teach kids, we teach ourselves, we gather in churches to say compassion matters, and we do political involvement engagement campaigns, and then we develop mutually respectful partnerships with agencies, churches, and other that are in the pockets of the world where there are deep hunger, and these folks are addressing and providing food and technical assistance and agricultural information, and they're working with their own governments and working in health clinics to ensure that the hungry are fed and that the hungry can be self-sufficient. PWRDF builds those relationships with agencies in countries all over the world, Africa, Southeast Asia, Central and Latin America, everywhere where there are hungry people, in refugee camps, in displaced people camps, in communities that have degraded environments, in communities that are living on very marginal lands. Where do you find these kinds of committed partners all over the world? And one of the great gifts of the Christian church is that they are in many of the places of deep need. And so both PWRDF and PWRDF, as one of the collective in CFGB, enters into that network and can provide resources. They can provide resources, both financial, food, and technical, because Canadians, just regular folks, care and contribute and are engaged.
I love to hear the language of relationships, and I guess I think of a great big table, and there might be people from industry, large-scale farming. There might be folks there from maybe a permaculture or other sustainable farming methodology. Something in me wonders who is not the table, and I'm aware in all aspects of justice advocacy. We're sometimes speaking to each other in silos, kind of left out of these conversations, because it does sound like the Foodgrains Bank in particular has been able to host some pretty amazing conversations here in Canada from what I've learned, and probably the Primates Fund as well. I'm a newcomer to taking an active role in the Primates Fund, so I have much to learn. But are there people being left out of our conversations, or are we doing okay?
I've always said that Jesus preaching about the banquet, Jesus' kingdom table, is a place where everyone has a place. Every place is a place of dignity. And the only people that are left out are those that exclude themselves. However, so that's the kingdom. However, in real life, especially now, as our world polarizes, as we say this is who we are and we're not you, and we also say this is the right way to do things, and you disagree, therefore you become them, and we polarize into people that think like us and people that don't think like us. But if we're arguing food justice, if we're arguing from a place of the kingdom table, the question is not who's right, who has a place at the table. The question is always who has access to the table, and how do we ensure that everyone has access to the table? So the us, them stuff has to be deconstructed. And in Canada, we have lots of us, thems. People who have better access and less access, people who think correctly according to some politically correct way of understanding the food system, and people who don't. We divide ourselves up between rural and urban people, and there are deep suspicions between those. And rural people divide themselves up into big farmers and small farmers, and the right way to farm and the right way to eat. And those discussions are useful if they improve, if they expand and deepen our care for neighbor and care for creation, but they are deeply destructive if it divides the table. We can say that there is enough food in the world for everyone to have enough, for everyone to have enough daily food. So there is enough, and there's enough physically food, and there's enough knowledge, there's enough technical know-how to ensure that everyone has enough food. So you say, why over 600 million people are still hungry today? Why? A divisive issue rather than an issue of nourishment and justice.
So we return to that phrase that we singled out. How dare we send the people away hungry? Thank you again for your time this morning. I do wish you a blessed season of creation, and I look forward to our next conversation. What shall we talk about next? Who knows?
And Ken, isn't creation totally God's free, unbelievable, amazing gift?
Yeah, I would even say it's God's playground. Yeah.
And it's from that that we can say there's enough food for all, and not only enough food, but good food.
Good food. Yeah. Amen and amen.